The plastic cup is cold in my hand, but not as cold as the stairs that slide right over me. I'm sitting at what they've politely called the staff table, though I'm the only one at it. My daughter's wedding reception is a sea of silk and laughter in a Bozeman ballroom that probably costs more per hour than I make in a month. I watch him, Clint, my new son-in-law. His smile is wide and white, shaking hands with men in suits that fit like they were born in them. He's over by the champagne fountain, a real flowing fountain of the stuff, surrounded by his parents and their friends. They're all gleaming. I look down at my own clothes, my best pair of jeans, and a button-up shirt that's seen one too many washes. I feel every frayed thread. I take a sip from my cup. It's just water. When the waiter came by with a tray of flutes bubbling with champagne, he paused, looked at my table, at my lone chair, and just moved on. I didn't even get a chance to decline. It's like I'm invisible. A piece of the scenery, maybe the worn-out rug in the grand foyer, everyone steps over. My eyes find Maggie, my daughter, for a second. She's a radiant blur of white satin pulled into Clint's orbit, smiling up at him. She doesn't look over here. I don't blame her, not really. This is her day, the life she's chosen. A life of champagne fountains and ballrooms. A life so far from the modest, dusty one I could ever give her. The keys in my pocket feel heavy. Not the keys to my old truck, but the new ones. The single shiny key to the little house I just managed to buy, my fresh start. It's supposed to be a hope, but sitting here, drowning in this quiet humiliation, it just feels like a reminder of the canyon between what I have and all of this, between me and the man now holding my daughter's hand. I watch Clint clap a wealthy-looking uncle on the back, the picture of ease. He hasn't glanced my way once. Not a nod, not a wave. I'm not a father to be acknowledged. I'm a problem that's been neatly tucked away at the back of the room, out of the perfect wedding photos. I finish the water, the plastic crunching slightly in my fist. This isn't just a table, it's a line drawn in the polished floor, and I've been placed firmly on the wrong side of it. The sun was just starting to dip behind the Bitterroot Mountains, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, but I wasn't paying it much mind. I was carrying a bale of hay to the north pasture when I heard her voice, soft and worried, drifting from the open kitchen window. It was Maggie, my girl, on the phone. I shouldn't have eavesdropped, but a father's ears are tuned to the frequency of his child's distress. "I just don't know, Sarah," she was saying, her voice tight. "Clint's wonderful, you know he is. But his parents, when we visited last weekend, it was all about which country club and the right neighborhoods, and his mum kept asking about the ranching portfolio." She let out a shaky little breath that near broke my heart. They weren't rude, not exactly. It was just this chill, like I wasn't good enough because my dad works with his hands and our money smells like hay and leather, not stock reports. I set the bale down, the dust floating in the golden light. My successful ranch, every acre paid for with sweat and dawns, suddenly felt like a mark against my daughter in some invisible ledger. I thought about Clint. He'd always been polite to me, firm handshake, looked me in the eye. But Polish can cover a lot. I thought about the keys to the new house Maggie and he had just bought, sitting on our mantel. They represented her future, a future I wouldn't let be cold. Right then an idea settled in my mind, clear and calm as a mountain lake. It wasn't about being mean. It was a test of character, the only kind that matters. 2 weeks later, at the wedding rehearsal dinner, they'd all be there, and so would I, but not as Wyatt, the rancher. I'd be cousin Walt from a distant down on our luck branch of the family. I'd wear my oldest, most faded shirt, the one with the frayed collar. I'd talk about my fictional, failing farm and my truck that barely ran. I wanted to see their eyes. I needed to know if their warmth was for my daughter or for the idea of her. If Clint was the man I hoped he was, he'd shake cousin Walt's calloused hand just as firmly as he ever shook mine. And if he wasn't, well, a father needs to know what kind of house, what kind of life those keys are truly opening. I adjusted the fake glasses on my face, the collar of my borrowed suit itching my neck. From the back row of the ceremony, I had a perfect hidden view. Maggie was a few rows up, a solid, reassuring presence. My focus, though, was locked on the front. On Clint. The officiant was speaking, but the words were just noise. My heart was a drum against my ribs. This was it, the first test of the disguise. That's when I felt it, a cold, heavy stare. I shifted my eyes just slightly. Clint's mother, seated in the front row of the bride's side, had turned her head. She wasn't looking at her son. She was looking directly at me. Her gaze traveled slowly, deliberately, from my two shiny shoes, up the ill-fitting suit jacket, to my face. There was no curiosity in it, only a pure, distilled disdain, like she'd smelled something foul. My blood ran cold. I forced myself to look forward, to keep my breathing even. Just a stranger in the back, I chanted in my head. Nobody. The ceremony ended. As the new couple walked back down the aisle, all smiles, the guests began to stand and mill about, heading for the reception hall. The air filled with chatter and laughter. I stood slowly, trying to melt into the crowd moving toward the doors. That's when Clint's father's voice cut through the pleasant buzz. He was a big man, holding court near the exit, clapping friends on the back. His voice boomed, meant to be heard. "Beautiful service," he declared. Then with a mocking chuckle he added, "Really makes you appreciate when certain people know how to dress appropriately for occasions, doesn't it?" A few people near him laughed awkwardly. He wasn't looking at me, not directly, but the line was fired into the crowd like a shot. I felt every eye in the vicinity flicker, searching for the poorly dressed offender. I kept my head down, my hand instinctively checking the pocket of my jacket. The hard, metallic shape of the keys to our new house was there. Our future. My fingers closed around them, a tiny anchor of reality. I caught Maggie's eye across the room. She gave me the faintest, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Don't react. Keep moving." Swallowing the hot, metallic taste of humiliation, I let the current of well-dressed guests carry me out of the chapel and toward the next phase of the plan. The keys dug into my palm. A silent promise. This was just the beginning. I took my seat at the table, the plastic chair scraping loudly against the ballroom floor. The wedding coordinator had given me a tight, professional smile and pointed me here, to this single table set apart near the swinging kitchen doors. The clatter of pans and the shouted orders of the catering staff were my dinner music. I watched the main reception from my island. Laughter bubbled up from tables draped in elegant linen where guests toasted with champagne. My daughter, Maggie, was a radiant blur of white silk, smiling at something her new husband said. She hadn't looked this way yet. Then my plate arrived. While the other guests were served herb-crusted salmon and asparagus spears, a harried server slid a plain chicken breast, boiled potatoes and unseasoned green beans in front of me. The difference was a slap in the face served on a china platter. I just stared at it, my appetite gone. That's when I heard the laugh. It was a loud, grating sound I knew too well. Clint's brother, a man who shared his sneer, was holding court at a table not 10 feet from my exile. He raised his voice just enough, glancing in my direction. "Gotta admire the dedication," he chuckled to his companions. "Even the charity cases get a hot meal. Classy move, Clint. Very inclusive." The people at his table laughed politely, awkwardly. My face burned. I wasn't a guest, I was a prop in Clint's little play, a lesson being demonstrated to the entire wedding party about who held power here. And then, as if on cue, Maggie turned. Her gaze swept over the room, and for a second it passed over me. There was a flicker in her eyes, a mild confusion at the lonely man sitting by the kitchen, but there was no recognition, no spark of memory. The makeup, the distance, and probably Clint's careful coaching did their job. She saw a stranger, a logistical oddity, before she turned back to her new life. I pushed the bland chicken around my plate. The keys to her new house, their new house, fell like a lead weight in my pocket. This wasn't just a slight. This was a message, carved into a dry chicken breast and delivered by a sneering relative. I was being erased, one cruel detail at a time. And the worst part was, from where she sat, Maggie couldn't even see it happening. I kept my distance, leaning against the wall with a glass of lemonade. I wasn't really drinking. This was supposed to be a happy day for Maggie, but my gut was twisting into knots. My eyes tracked Clint as he moved through the crowded backyard of his parents' massive home. He wasn't with Maggie. He was holding court near the marble fountain, surrounded by people in clothes that probably cost more than my rent. I saw his father, a man with a loud, booming laugh, clap a guy on the back. "Investment of a lifetime," he declared, waving a hand toward the sprawling vineyard behind the house. "You just have to know the right people." And that was the whole show. I watched them. Clint, his parents, his slick brother, lavish attention on certain guests, the men with the fancy watches, the women whose jewelry glittered in the sun. The conversations were a symphony of name-dropping and subtle bragging about property lines, political access, and stock portfolios. It was a performance of power, and they were all playing their parts perfectly. Then I looked for Maggie. She was over by the snack table, trying to chat with a couple who looked uncomfortable in their simple, clean clothes. Her friends. She'd invited maybe 3 people from her old life. I saw her smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Clint drifted past them, heading to refill a rich guest's wine glass. He gave Maggie's group a faint, distant nod, the kind you give a waiter, and didn't stop. My heart just sank. It sank like a stone in a deep, cold pond. This wasn't just a party. It was a display, a sorting. The way Clint's mother air-kissed the cheek of a society woman, then barely mustered a tight smile for Maggie's kind-hearted former roommate. It told the whole story. They weren't just wealthy. They were a fortress, and their currency wasn't just money. It was status. And Maggie, my sweet, generous friend who thought she'd found her fairy tale, was standing on the wrong side of the moat. I set my glass down, the sweet lemonade now tasting sour. The keys to their new house, the ones Maggie had shown me with such hope this morning, felt like a lie in my pocket. This family's true nature wasn't in the brick and mortar of a house. It was right here, in this backyard, in the way they looked right through the people who didn't add to their empire. And Clint, the man she was going to marry, was learning his lines perfectly. The sound of polite applause filled the ballroom as Clint's parents, beaming with pride, wheeled out their gift. It was a gleaming brand-new sports car, a red bow stretched comically across its hood. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. From my seat at the staff table, where Maggie and I were just background noise, I watched it all unfold. Clint was in his element, soaking in the adoration, his arms slung around his new wife. He patted the hood of the car like a conquering king. Then, as the photographer's flashes went off, his eyes scanned the room. They landed on our table, on me. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. A slow, wide smirk spread across his face. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, then made this little gesture with his hand, a flick of his wrist, a dismissive wave in my direction. It was a silent public verdict. Beat that. You never could. You never will. For 5 years I'd taken it. The snide remarks about my job, the friendly digs about my apartment, the way he'd always managed to position himself as the successful one in every story. I'd let it roll off, told myself it didn't matter. But this was different. This was my brother, at his own wedding, using what should have been a pure moment to deliver one last calculated insult, to remind everyone, especially me, of my place. I felt Maggie's hand tense on my arm under the table. "Wyatt," she whispered, a warning and a question, but the switch had finally flipped. That smirk wasn't just arrogance, it was the culmination of every belittling comment, every stolen moment of confidence. Every time he'd made our parents' praise a competition, I couldn't win. The keys to our new house, the keys to our future felt like a lead weight in my pocket. They were real. What was behind me was over. I didn't slam my hands on the table. I didn't shout. I just stood up. The chair legs scraped softly on the ballroom floor, a small sound that somehow cut through the murmur of the crowd. Every eye at the nearby tables turned toward me, then followed my gaze to Clint. The smirk froze on his face, morphing into confusion. The photographer, sensing a shift, lowered his camera. I didn't have a giant bow or a flashy car. All I had was my dignity, which I'd left at this table for far too long. It was time to pick it back up. The presentation was over. Mine was just beginning. The air in the reception hall was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and roasted chicken. I could feel every eye on me as I walked, my boots scuffing softly on the polished floor. I kept my gaze forward, fixed on the head table where Clint stood, his smile as polished as the silverware. The gentle murmur of conversation died, replaced by a stiff, uncomfortable silence. I saw a woman in a sequined dress roll her eyes, and a man near the front checked his watch with an exaggerated sigh. I was a stain on their perfect day, a piece of the ragged past they'd all paid good money to forget. Clint detached himself from the bridal party, his tuxedo impeccable. He moved to intercept me, holding up a placating hand, his voice a low, practiced blend of concern and command. "Sir, please," he said, the words smooth as oil. "There's a time and a place." He said it like he was talking to a stray dog that had wandered in from the rain. He expected me to flinch, to stammer an apology, and shuffle back into the shadows where I belonged. That's what the old Wyatt would have done. I didn't even look at him. I walked right past his outstretched hand as if he were made of smoke. The silence deepened, crackling with tension. I could see Maggie from the corner of my eye, her hands clenched in her lap, her face pale. Reaching the small open space before the sweetheart table, I stopped. I let the silence stretch for one more heartbeat, feeling the weight of their judgment, their annoyance, their pity. Then slowly I reached into the pocket of my worn, ragged coat, the same coat I'd been wearing the day everything fell apart. My fingers closed around the small wrapped box. It wasn't fancy, just plain white paper, neatly folded. I pulled it out, holding it gently in my palm. It felt impossibly heavy. The room was so quiet I could hear the rustle of my own sleeve. Every single person, from Clint frozen in mid-step to the most annoyed guest in the back, was staring at this small, simple object in my hand. It didn't belong here, in this world of champagne and crystal. And that was exactly the point. The air in that crowded room felt like it had been sucked out all at once. I could see the confusion in Maggie's eyes as she took the small wrapped box from my hands. My hands, which she hadn't truly looked at in 5 long years. "For my little girl," I said, and I kept my voice low, the way I always used to when I was telling her a secret before bed. It was the voice that used to read her stories. It was firm, and it was familiar. Her fingers, trembling just a little, tore at the simple paper. The box lid came off, and there they were, gleaming under the party lights. A set of brass keys. She stared at them, uncomprehending. A house key, a car key, the little silver one for the shed. "I don't," she started, her voice barely a thread of sound. Then her eyes lifted from the keys to my face. Not a passing glance, but a real look. She searched my eyes, the same hazel as her mother's, then the line of my jaw, now clean-shaven instead of hidden under the scruffy beard I'd worn for years. She saw the scar above my eyebrow, the one I got fixing her bike when she was 7. The color drained from her own cheeks. Her lips parted. "Dad?" That one word whispered into the sudden silence hit me like a physical force. It was the word I'd dreamed of hearing. It was a question full of shock and dawning, impossible hope. And it was loud enough. A gasp went up from someone near the buffet table, then another. A ripple of pure astonishment moved through Clint's gathered friends and colleagues. A wave of murmured, "What?" and "Did she say?" All eyes were on me, the stranger who was suddenly not a stranger at all. My own gaze never left Maggie's tear-filled eyes, but on the edge of my vision, I saw him, Clint, the smug, triumphant look he'd worn all evening, the look of a man who had won everything, shattered. His face went as pale as the wedding cake behind him. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The glass in his hand seemed to tilt, the champagne threatening to spill. He wasn't looking at Maggie anymore. He was staring at me, seeing the ghost he'd tried to bury, now standing solid and real in the middle of his perfect life. In that frozen moment, with my daughter's whispered word hanging in the air and my greatest enemy struck dumb, I knew the first battle was over. He'd taken my past, but he didn't own my future, and now neither did he own hers. The keys in her hand were proof. I was back. The silence in that crowded room was so thick you could feel it pressing in. I looked at Maggie, my sister, her face still pale from the shock of Clint's earlier greedy words. Then I turned my gaze to Clint himself, standing there with that smug, possessive arm around her. This was it. I cleared my throat, and every eye snapped to me. I didn't raise my voice, but I made sure it carried, clear and steady, to the very back of the hall. "These keys," I began, holding them up so the light caught the brass. They jingled, a soft damning sound. "They aren't for a car, they're for a house. A fully paid, beautiful new house on 20 acres of the best land, right up against the mountains. The view... Maggie, you used to say you wanted to wake up and see the peaks." I saw her breath catch. I pressed on, my eyes locking with Clint's. "It was supposed to be my wedding gift to you both, but then I started hearing things, seeing things. The comments about my truck, my job, the image." I made air quotes, and a few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. "So I decided to run a little test. I wanted to see if your new family valued people or just appearances." I let that hang in the air for a beat. The humiliation on my in-laws' faces was instant and deep. Clint's mother brought a hand to her chest, her cheeks flushing scarlet. His father stared fixedly at the floor. Clint finally found his voice, but it was a splutter, a weak, sputtering engine trying to turn over. "Now, wait just a minute, Wyatt. This is a misunderstanding. We never meant... I was just concerned about practicality." But no one was listening to his excuses. All eyes had swung to Maggie. The look on her face shattered something in me, even though this was necessary. It wasn't anger at me. It was a dawning, horrified realization, a pure, unvarnished look of betrayal directed straight at Clint. She was seeing him and the world he'd pulled her into with perfect, painful clarity for the first time right here in front of everyone. The damage was done, and it was permanent. You could see it settling over the room. The whispers started, not excited or gossipy, but low and disapproving. The community they'd been so desperate to impress now looked at them with open contempt. Their reputation, built on such a fragile foundation of pretense, wasn't just cracked. It was obliterated right there in the middle of their own wedding reception. I closed my hand around the keys, the metal warm from my grip. The gift had served its purpose, but it had cost us all something. The steam from my coffee cup curled into the crisp Montana morning air, carrying the rich, dark scent that meant peace. I sat on the porch steps of Maggie's new house, her house, and watched the sky over the eastern plains catch fire. It had been weeks, long enough for the legal papers to be stamped annulled and for the last ugly echo of Clint's voice to fade completely from these walls. He was just a ghost now, a bad memory we were airing out along with the fresh paint and new furniture. Maggie sat in the rocking chair beside me, her own mug cradled in her hands. She wasn't just my little girl in this light. She was a woman, whole again. The tightness around her eyes that she'd carried for months was gone, replaced by a softness, a quiet certainty. She was surrounded by real love here, not the performative, critical kind Clint had offered. It was in the way she'd chosen every throw pillow herself, in the vegetable garden she was planning out back, in the simple fact that she could breathe. "It's a good sunrise, Dad," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "The best kind," I agreed, taking a slow sip. The warmth spread through my chest. My gaze drifted from the brilliant oranges and pinks bleeding across the horizon to the set of keys resting on the small table between us. They weren't just metal and plastic. They were freedom. The keys to this house, to this life, to a future she built on her own terms. I thought about the man I'd seen her with the other day, a local rancher's son with calloused hands and an easy laugh who'd helped her move a bookshelf. He'd looked at her like she was the sunrise itself, not an accessory to improve his own reflection. That was the difference. That was everything. I hadn't needed to throw a punch or make a grand speech in the end. Protecting her had meant being a steady presence, a safe harbor, while she found the strength to untie herself from that anchor of superficial judgment. I just had to be there, to remind her what real love looked like. It looked like this: a quiet porch, a shared silence that wasn't empty but full, a daughter safe and at peace. A quiet smile settled on my face, one that felt like it was etched right into my soul. I took another sip of coffee, bitter and perfect, and watched the new day fully claim the sky. It was over. We'd won the only fight that ever mattered. She was home.